Developments now on that reported Russian missile in Poland. Emergency security meetings right now underway across Europe. Joining me is defence strategy expert Dr. Malcolm Davis. Nice to see you this morning. Look, Moscow's just responded saying that the reports that Russian missile hits hit Poland are provocations. Do you think they're trying to deny it?
I'd say that's highly likely, but I think everyone understands that these are Russian missiles fired from Russia. I would guess that they were fired against Ukraine, but they went astray and hit Poland. And I think the best thing the Russians could do would be to admit to their mistake and de-escalate this as quickly as possible.
See, I mean, that's the thing that's not entirely clear at the moment, isn't it? Was it this a deliberate Russian attack or potentially fragments from one of their missiles shot down by Ukraine? But look, does that even matter here? I mean, when you're firing hundreds of missiles into Ukraine, you've got to expect that perhaps something like this is bound to happen, right?
Well, they were not fragments of missiles shot down by Ukraine. These were Russian missiles that were essentially fired. They overshot their target, probably, and hit Poland. The other possibility is they were deliberate attacks on Poland. And I think that's why you're having these meetings now in NATO to ascertain which of those two options is the truth. But either way, this is a grave escalation by Russia. And it's incumbent upon Russia to de-escalate the situation as quickly as possible by admitting culpability.
Well, look, I mean, we heard from the US, the Pentagon this morning, saying it'll defend, quote, every inch of NATO territory. The thing here is that Ukraine is not part of NATO. So what does that actually mean and what could it potentially look like?
Well, look, if you have further such accidents of Russian missiles hitting NATO territory, then at that point you would have what's known as Article 5 come into play, where NATO would basically respond militarily against Russia, because an attack on one under Article 5 is an attack on all NATO states. So you would then have NATO enter the war against Russia, and that would be a very grave step. I think everyone understands the potential for escalation from that point onwards up to and through the nuclear threshold. So everyone's wanting to avoid that, but we cannot simply do nothing in the face of Russian attacks on NATO.
I mean, realistically, though, what are they going to do? And this all happens as you've got all world leaders in one place. They're meeting in Bali for the G20.
Look, what happens now is probably known as Article 4, which is that NATO leaders come together to recognise that there is a threat against NATO. They take appropriate countermeasures, and that could include dramatically beefing up forces along the Polish-Ukrainian border and closer to Russia, to prepare against any further such attacks. It's not an Article 5 which would require a military response, but an Article 4 does require preparations for war. So we are likely to see this particular attack this morning increase tensions and increase the risk of a war between NATO and Russia.
Yeah, some pretty high-level talks be happening in Bali today between those G20 leaders. Really appreciate your time this morning, Malcolm. Thank you. What the escalation that we've just seen this morning, obviously you've got leaders from UK, US, Canada, they're all there in one place. I assume it's going to be the centre of attention and a pretty tense day there.
It has to be the centre of attention. Putin wasn't there, of course, isn't there, so that gives them easier carte blanche to say what they want about him. Our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese talked to Xi Jinping yesterday evening in Bali, and he did talk about Ukraine, and he congratulated Xi on opposing the use of nuclear weapons. Of course, he didn't mention missiles. He didn't know about that, but sure, this is going to be front and centre there.
He also said something to the effect of, you know, it'd be better if you stayed out of that conflict. Is that likely to be heard? Those calls?
Well, I think the Chinese have done their best to stay out because the sanctions have been pretty well observed, and. But China hasn't walked back from its general no limits agreement with Russia, and she calls Putin my best, most intimate friend.
So look, I mean, this chat has been 6 years in the making since any Aussie leader has sat down with the Chinese president. How significant was it? Obviously, our PM expressed concerns over trade, Taiwan and human rights abuses. Pretty tense half hour, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's very significant. It's significant for both parties because Xi Jinping, you know, he had this recent, hugely important party congress, which he took power for another 5, probably 10 years, and he switched the legitimacy of the party from the fading economy to stressing that he was going to keep China safe from a hostile world. So international relations has been hugely elevated recently under Xi Jinping. So all these talks carry a lot more weight, and we could see he talked with Albanese, he talked with Joe Biden for 3 hours, and Biden wants to manage the competition between them so it doesn't turn into conflict. So that was the kind of context. And for us, very important because messaging from the top in China cascades down. So seeing the top guy is going to help a lot in arranging meetings further down.
I have a feeling he's going to have a pretty uncomfortable day, Xi Jinping. Anyway, we have breaking news. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Plenty of build-up here, though. More on that breaking news. A Russian missile has hit Poland, killing 2 people in the NATO nation. The serious escalation in the war in Ukraine is bound to have an impact on the global markets. And for more, economics editor at the AFR, John Keogh, joins us here in the studio. Nice to see you this morning. Is it too soon to have seen a reaction on the markets, or what's happening?
Yeah, look, the markets have been fairly muted in their reaction. They pulled back a little bit in New York on Wall Street, but I think people are just hoping this is an unintended escalation that's more accident than intentional. But it's these sort of events that do make investors very nervous that a war that looks confined to a certain area can suddenly spread through some sort of escalation. And
it doesn't ease any of the burdens on energy, you know, for the short term either, does it? It's like, oh, well, if this is going to be more embedded, then long term there's going to be more impacts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fuel, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a risk with these sort of events that it can continue to put upward pressure on energy prices as well. There was a bit of good news that investors are paying attention to, though, in the US. Inflation overnight again came in lower than expected. This is for business inflation. So another good sign that global US inflation pressures are easing.
How is the US's inflation going down when everyone else is going through, you know, an upward inflection?
Yeah, it's a good point. They seem to have hit the cycle earlier, so they'll come out of it a little bit earlier potentially. Yeah. We're sort of catching up to where they are. So we'll probably come out of it maybe a little bit later than they do. Okay.
And when you say later, when you're thinking?
Oh, sort of...
Hey, you're on the spot here.
We like doing that to John. He always handles the pressure.
Look, inflation should start to ease next year, but it's going to stay pretty high for a couple of years. It's not going to return to the Reserve Bank's target range for till 2024, they reckon. So.
And look, I mean, this has sort of overshadowed a bit the PM meeting Xi Jinping yesterday. Obviously, tariffs discussed. Is there going to be much movement there?
Look, I think Australia's hopeful that over the coming months they might ease some of those trade restrictions and tariffs on the $20 billion of things like coal, beef, barley, wine that had all these sanctions slapped on them. I don't think Xi Jinping's going to immediately drop them, but at least it's a good first step. Because China's our biggest trading partner, it's important that we at least can talk to these people.
It's a big deal. Look, there are a lot of business leaders over there as well trying to capitalise. I've seen a lot of them over there with their bintang singlets on. What's going to happen for business, more importantly, out of all this?
Well, I think business will be feeling a bit more optimistic if there's dialogue happening because that will continue to allow business to have more dialogue with their counterparts in China as well. But the important thing about this...
it's been a no-go zone. I mean, people, you can't even travel there.
Well, yeah, people haven't felt safe about going there. But it is interesting, though. Businesses start to diversify and try and sell more products to other markets like India, Southeast Asia. So they're trying to become a little bit less dependent on China as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. G'day, it's Ali.
And Karl.
Thanks for watching the Today YouTube channel.
Subscribe now for brand new videos every day and exclusive bonus clips.
Ali, say please.
Please? Why?
Please? I don't know.